Last night, I lost everything, and for a moment, I just stood there, not knowing what to say, what to do, or where to go next. Life has a strange way of reminding us that nothing is guaranteed. One moment, you think you have everything under control. The next, everything you built can disappear in a single night. But this story isn't really about losing everything, it's about what happens after. Because when you lose the things you thought you couldn't live without, you discover something you never knew you had, the strength to begin again. So let me tell you what happened last night, and why somehow losing everything may have been the beginning of finding myself. Last night, I lost everything. I don't mean that in the dramatic way people sometimes say it when they've had a bad day. I mean, there was a moment when I looked around and realized that the things I had spent so much time building, protecting, and believing in were suddenly not there anymore. The plans I had made felt meaningless. The things I thought would always be waiting for me were gone. And for a while, I didn't know how to process it. There is a strange silence that comes after losing something important. It's not always crying, it's not always anger. Sometimes it's just sitting there, staring at the same place for a long time, trying to understand how your life could look so different from one moment to the next. You keep thinking, maybe this isn't real. Maybe I'll wake up. Maybe tomorrow I'll find out that everything was just a misunderstanding. But then the morning comes, and reality is still there. And that's when you realize that life doesn't always give you time to prepare. Sometimes it changes before you're ready. Sometimes it takes something from you without asking whether you can handle it. Sometimes it closes a door so suddenly that you don't even have time to say goodbye. Last night taught me something I wish I had learned in a gentler way. We spend so much of our lives trying to hold on. We hold on to people. We hold on to money. We hold on to memories. We hold on to plans. We hold on to the version of ourselves we think we're supposed to become. And somewhere along the way, we begin to believe that these things are who we are. So when one of them disappears, we feel like a part of ourselves has disappeared with it. But maybe that's not true. Maybe losing something doesn't always mean losing yourself. Maybe sometimes when everything around you falls away, you finally get to see what was underneath all of it. The first thing I felt was fear, not the kind of fear that makes you run. It was quieter than that. It was the kind of fear that sits inside your chest and makes you wonder what happens next. What do I do now? Where do I go? How do I rebuild? How do I explain this to the people who believed I had everything figured out? Those questions can become very loud when you're alone, and sometimes the hardest part isn't the loss itself. It's the story you immediately start telling yourself about what the loss means. You start thinking you're finished, you start thinking you failed, you start thinking everyone else is moving forward while you're standing still. You look at someone else's life and imagine that they're certain, secure, and happy while you're trying to figure out how to put your own life back together, but you don't know what they're carrying. You don't know what happens when they close their door at night. You don't know what battles they're fighting quietly, and they don't know yours. That's one of the strange things about being human. We are all walking around with invisible stories. Some people carry grief, some carry regret, some carry disappointment. Some are trying to recover from decisions they wish they could change. Some are smiling while quietly wondering how much longer they can keep pretending everything is okay. And sometimes, the person who looks the strongest is simply the person who has learned how to hide the cracks. Last night, I stopped hiding mine. I stopped trying to convince myself that I was okay. I sat with the loss, I let it hurt. I let myself admit that I was scared, and there was something strangely honest about that. Because we are taught to fight everything, fight the pain, fight the fear, fight sadness. Keep moving, keep working, keep smiling, keep telling everyone that you're fine. But there are moments when strength isn't about pretending you're not broken. Sometimes strength is looking at what happened and saying, this hurts. This wasn't what I wanted. I don't understand it yet. But I'm still here. Those words may not sound powerful, but sometimes staying is powerful. Sometimes getting through one more night is powerful. Sometimes taking a breath when you don't know what tomorrow will look like is enough. We put so much pressure on ourselves to have answers. We want to know the next step before we've even finished processing the last one. We want a 5-year plan for a life that changed 5 minutes ago. But maybe you don't need to know everything tonight. Maybe you only need to know the next small thing. Get up, take a breath, drink some water, make the call, say what needs to be said, rest if you need to rest. Cry if you need to cry. And then, when you're ready, take another step. Not because everything is suddenly okay, but because your story isn't over. That's what I kept thinking about. My story isn't over. Losing everything doesn't automatically mean that there is nothing left. There is still experience. There are still lessons. There are still memories. There is still the ability to choose what happens next. And most importantly, there is still you. That may sound simple, but when life strips away the things you thought defined you, that simple truth can become incredibly powerful. You are still here, your heart is still beating, you can still learn, you can still change, you can still apologize, you can still forgive, you can still begin. And beginning again doesn't have to look impressive. Sometimes beginning again looks like getting out of bed. Sometimes it looks like cleaning a room that you've ignored for weeks. Sometimes it looks like answering one message. Sometimes it looks like admitting that you need help. Sometimes it looks like walking outside and feeling the air on your face after spending too much time trapped inside your own thoughts. We often imagine rebuilding as something dramatic, a new career, a new house, a new relationship, a new life, but real rebuilding is usually much quieter. It's one decision at a time, one morning at a time, one honest conversation at a time, one small promise to yourself at a time. And maybe that's what I needed to understand. I didn't have to rebuild everything last night. I didn't have to know where I'd be next year. I didn't even have to know where I'd be next month. I just had to make it through the night without giving up on myself. There is a difference between losing what you had and losing your ability to create something new. Those are not the same thing. You can lose possessions and still have your hands. You can lose money and still have your mind. You can lose a relationship and still have your capacity to love. You can lose a dream and still have the ability to dream again. You can lose a chapter and still have an entire book waiting to be written. And sometimes the hardest chapter becomes the one that changes you the most, not because you wanted it, not because you deserved it, but because it forced you to look at yourself without all the distractions, without the achievements, without the applause, without the things you used to prove to yourself and everyone else that you were doing well, just you. And maybe that's terrifying, but maybe it's also freeing because if you can learn to value yourself when everything is going well, that's beautiful. But if you can learn to value yourself when everything falls apart, that's something deeper. That's when you discover that your worth was never sitting inside the things you lost. It was never inside a bank account. It was never inside someone's approval. It was never inside a title. It was never inside a perfect plan. Those things can add meaning to your life, but they cannot become the foundation of your identity, because anything outside of you can change. People change, circumstances change, opportunities disappear, plans fail, doors close, life moves. And if your entire identity depends on things staying exactly the way they are, every change will feel like the end of you, but you are allowed to change too. You are allowed to become someone new after something breaks. You're allowed to look back at your old life and say, I love that version of myself, but I'm not going to live there forever. You're allowed to start again. You are allowed to take your time. You are allowed to not have all the answers. And you are allowed to be proud of yourself for surviving something nobody else completely understands. Last night I thought I had lost everything. Today, I'm beginning to wonder if I simply lost the things I was never meant to hold forever. Maybe some things leave because their chapter is finished. Maybe some people walk away because their role in your story is ended. Maybe some plans collapse because they were built for a version of you that no longer exists. And maybe that's why endings hurt so much. Because we aren't only saying goodbye to what happened, we're saying goodbye to who we were when it happened. That's not easy. There are parts of ourselves we have to grieve too. The person who believed everything would work out exactly as planned, the person who trusted certain promises, the person who thought certain people would always be there, the person who thought they had more time. You may have to let that person go, but you don't have to hate them. You can thank them. They did the best. They knew how. They loved. They hoped. They trusted. They tried. And now it's your turn to carry the lessons forward, not the bitterness, not the fear, not the resentment, the lessons. That's the difference between being destroyed by a difficult experience and being transformed by one. The pain may stay for a while. That's okay. Healing doesn't happen because you decide one morning that you're finished hurting. You can understand something and still miss it. You can forgive someone and still remember what happened. You can move forward and still have moments when you look back. Moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It means refusing to let yesterday decide everything about tomorrow. And I think that's what I want to remember from this night, not just what I lost, but what the loss revealed. It revealed how much I had been taking for granted. It revealed which things actually mattered. It revealed which fears were bigger in my mind than they were in reality. It revealed that I had been waiting for the perfect moment to live, while life had been happening in front of me the entire time. We do that sometimes. We tell ourselves we'll be happy when we have more money, when the relationship works out, when the career improves, when the house is bigger, when the problems disappear, when everything finally makes sense. But life doesn't promise us a version without problems. It gives us moments, some beautiful, some painful, some ordinary. And maybe the goal isn't to control every moment. Maybe it's to be present enough to actually live them. Last night was painful. I won't pretend otherwise. But somewhere in that pain, I found a quiet realization. I don't need to have everything to have a reason to continue. I don't need everyone's approval. I don't need certainty. I don't need to know exactly how the story ends. I only need enough courage to keep writing the next page. And maybe that's where rebuilding begins, not with confidence, not with a perfect plan, not with some dramatic declaration that everything will be different tomorrow. It begins with something much smaller, a decision. A quiet decision made when nobody is watching. I may have lost what I had, but I haven't lost the ability to become who I need to be. I may not know what comes next, but I can meet it when it arrives. I may be tired. I may be afraid. I may not feel ready, but I can still take one step, and then another, and another. Because sometimes you don't rebuild your life by knowing exactly where you're going. Sometimes you rebuild it by refusing to stop moving. There will be mornings when the loss feels fresh again. There will be moments when you wonder whether starting over was worth it. There will be nights when you miss the life you used to have. Let those moments come. You don't have to fight every feeling. You don't have to turn pain into a lesson immediately. Sometimes you just have to let yourself be human. And then when the morning comes, remind yourself that another day has arrived, another opportunity, another breath, another chance to make one better decision. You don't have to become a completely different person overnight. You just have to become a little more honest, a little more patient, a little more grateful, a little more willing to let go, a little more willing to begin, because maybe losing everything isn't the end of the story. Maybe it's the moment when the story finally becomes honest. And maybe someday, when you look back at the night everything fell apart, you won't only remember the pain, you'll remember that you were still standing, you'll remember that you thought you couldn't continue, and somehow you did. You'll remember that you had nothing certain left, and yet you found the courage to take another step. And perhaps that will be the part that matters most. Not what you lost, not how far you fell, but what you chose to become after the fall. There is a moment after loss when the world becomes strangely quiet, not peaceful, not calm, just quiet. The phone stops feeling important. The noise around you fades. Conversations that once seemed urgent suddenly feel distant. You can hear the clock, you can hear your own breathing. And in that silence, your mind begins asking questions you weren't ready to answer. What now? Who am I without what I lost? Where do I go from here? Sometimes silence is harder than noise because there is nowhere to hide from your own thoughts. During the day, you can stay busy, you can talk to people, you can find something to do, you can convince yourself that you're okay. But at night, when everything becomes still, the truth has a way of sitting beside you, and that's when memories return. You remember the way things used to be. You remember conversations, places, faces, plans. Small moments you never thought would become memories. You realize how easily we take ordinary days for granted. A normal morning, a familiar voice, a meal with someone you love, a message you expected to receive, a door you assumed would always open. We rarely understand the value of something while we're living inside it. We think there will always be another day, another conversation, another chance, another opportunity to say what we should have said. Then something changes, and suddenly, the ordinary becomes precious. But I learned something in that silence. You don't have to fill every empty space immediately. Sometimes you need to sit with it. You need to allow yourself to understand what happened before you decide what it means. Because when you're hurting, your mind can tell you stories that aren't true. It can tell you that you're finished. that you're alone, that nothing good will ever happen again, that the best part of your life is behind you. But pain is not always a reliable narrator. Pain speaks in extremes. It says everything is gone, but maybe everything isn't gone. Maybe something is still there. Maybe it's your ability to begin. Maybe it's your ability to love. Maybe it's your ability to learn. Maybe it's simply the fact that you're still breathing and still capable of making another choice. The silence taught me not to make permanent decisions based on temporary darkness. When you're hurting, don't decide your entire future. Just get through today. Let tomorrow arrive before you judge it. There is something powerful about giving life another morning, because sometimes the night makes everything look impossible, and then the sun rises. Nothing has magically changed. The problems may still be there, the loss may still be real, but somehow, you can see a little farther, you can breathe a little deeper, you can take one small step, that's enough. We don't always need a miracle. Sometimes we need time, time to grieve, time to understand, time to accept, time to rebuild, and time to discover that the person you become after loss doesn't have to be the same person who existed before it. Maybe that's what the silence is for. Maybe it isn't empty at all. Maybe it's where you finally hear yourself again. I used to think strength meant being certain, knowing what to do, knowing where to go, knowing that no matter what happened you could handle it. But I don't think that's what strength really is. Sometimes strength is standing in the middle of uncertainty and still choosing not to give up. Sometimes it's waking up after a night that changed everything and deciding that you're going to get out of bed anyway. You don't feel powerful. You don't feel ready. You don't feel brave. You simply decide to take one more step, and maybe that's where real strength begins. We often don't know how strong we are because life hasn't asked us to find out yet. You can spend years believing you know your limits. Then something happens, something you never expected, something you never planned for. And suddenly, you're standing at the edge of a life you don't recognize. At first you think, I can't do this. But then you do. Not perfectly, not without fear, not without tears. But you do it. You make the phone call, you face the morning, you have the difficult conversation, you keep working, you keep breathing, you keep moving. And one day you realize something. You survived a day you were convinced you couldn't survive. Then another. And another. That's how strength grows quietly, without applause, without anyone noticing. Nobody sees every battle you fight inside your own mind. Nobody sees the moments when you almost give up but choose to continue. Nobody sees how hard it can be to smile when your heart feels heavy, but you know, and eventually, that knowledge becomes something you can carry. You begin to understand that courage doesn't mean you aren't afraid. It means fear doesn't get the final decision. You can be afraid and still move forward. You can be uncertain and still begin. You can be brokenhearted and still believe that life can become meaningful again. You can lose something important and still refuse to lose yourself. That's a different kind of strength. It's not loud, it doesn't need to prove anything. It simply says, I'm still here. And sometimes those three words are enough. I'm still here, after everything, after the disappointment, after the loss, after the plans failed, after the people left, after the future I imagined disappeared. I'm still here. And as long as you're still here, the story can change. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually, because life has a way of surprising us. A door closes, and another appears somewhere we weren't looking. A relationship ends, and you discover parts of yourself you had forgotten. A dream disappears and another one slowly takes its place. A difficult season passes, and you realize it taught you something you could never have learned in comfort. I don't think pain automatically makes us stronger. Pain is just pain, but what we choose to do with it can change us. We can let it make us bitter, or we can let it make us more aware, more patient, more compassionate, more honest. We can carry the wound forever, or we can eventually learn how to carry the lesson. That doesn't mean pretending it didn't hurt. It means refusing to let the hurt become the entire story. There will always be things we cannot control. People will leave, plans will fail, opportunities will disappear, life will surprise us. We can spend our entire lives fighting that reality, or we can learn to meet life as it comes, not with certainty, with presence, one day at a time, one decision at a time, one breath at a time. Maybe you don't need to be strong for the next 10 years. Maybe you only need enough strength for this moment. Then, when the next moment comes, find a little more. That's how people rebuild, not through one enormous act of courage.